Hey, reader, this is Centaur here, and this week we are continuing with our nation ranking series, and we are in the top three. We only have three left to go. We've reached some of the really, really biggest armies, some of the more common armies, by the way, that people own. And I'm very excited because, as somebody who hails from the United States, who grew up overlooking Pearl Harbor, this week we have reached America. Okay, I'm really sorry, by the way, for your volume if that was bad. Um, I'll be honest, I love my country. My country is not perfect. We are not, the coolest ever. It's not like we've never made any mistakes, but by golly, we sure contributed a lot to World War II, and a lot of courage issued by people who I even know and met. And that I had a chance to know while I was growing up, and even more that I've met since then. Today, as we're overlooking their special rules, it's worth noting, by the way, that this week is going to be America Week, which is weird timing because it's before our Independence Day coming up in the first week of July. So I didn't time it all that well. I wasn't thinking that far ahead when I started my series back in November, so here we are. But all three of our videos this week are going to be talking about American options that are available to both them as well as other nations and discussing them. So I think it's fitting that we start off with looking at the Army as it was in second edition and how it is so far now that we even have an Army book. Possible erratas coming along the line, you never really know, but at least until then, hey, at least we have a book so we know a little more and have a firmer idea of what we can expect going into third edition. So to start off with, look at the Army special rules. They were really good, actually, in second edition. So you start with fire and maneuver, the one that everybody knew. Arguably the strongest of the special rules, and thus the reason why people felt a little more attached to this one when it went through changes in third. But the rule was simple. It was just that rifles and BARs got to ignore the -1 to hit penalty when they advanced, which is incredible. Because remember, you're starting at a 3 plus to hit in second edition. And so it'd be 4s if you're moving and shooting 5s if you're at long range. Now you're looking at 3s if you're shooting, stays at 3s if you move and shoot, goes up to 4s if you're at long range. So it was actually quite effective. And especially if you could get pretty close to the enemy and then just be able to declare fire actions and not be at long range, you could do really well. And the fact that the BAR had a 30-inch range meant that you didn't even have to get within 12 inches in order to start ignoring some of those long range penalties to hit. You could get within 15 inches, which doesn't sound dramatic, but as somebody who's played war games for a long time, you'd be surprised what a difference that can make. And so, on the whole, really good special rule. It allowed them to be, one of the dominant, if not the dominant skirmish armies in the game. Finland was also a really good play over in second edition, but I mean, I think it's fair to say the Americans were kind of the top. And partially that's also because they had access to gyro stabilizers, where veteran tanks, their main gun specifically, if they were taken veteran, could ignore the -1 to hit penalty when they advanced. Now, this is not as great as it sounds, okay? On the one hand, being able to make it so that way your anti-tank gun can maneuver around and start shooting and shooting and shooting at people and reliably hit and pin and potentially damage enemy vehicles is fantastic. However, a lot of American vehicles, as you'll soon see, are not just being taken because they have a nice big main gun. They're being taken because they have a big main gun escorted by one or more machine guns because that's how we roll in the US of A. Note that the gyro stabilizer only applies to the gyro stabilized light anti-tank gun, medium anti-tank gun, heavy anti-tank gun, etc. It did not apply to hull-mounted machine guns, pintle-mounted machine guns. I'm not even sure it applied to coaxial machine guns. I'm pretty sure. So, because of that, like, it is good. Don't get me wrong. This is a good special rule. The fact it required you to take a premium cost on your tanks in order to get it, and it only applied to the main armament, meant it was good. It was fine. It is a positive special rule. It is not something I was overly seeking out. I only played with gyro stabilizers in 2 practice games, and I just didn't feel like I was getting that much out of it. If I'm wrong about how this rule works, please let me know down in the comments below. But I'm pretty sure that's how it works. So suffice to say, it's good, but it's not great. You're not able to capitalize on it as much as you might be able to with other armies. You also have air superiority, which allowed air observers to call in 2 strikes instead of 1 in every game, which on the one hand, airstrikes can be a great pin generating machine. It can even sometimes remove units, which is great. On the other hand, they were also a really great way to nuke your own stuff, and we don't like that. So, positive, some negatives. I ran a bunch of these in casual games. I went to a tournament with these, and I didn't run an air observer. There was just it was too many wild factors, too many things I didn't like. This did change in third edition, so more on that a little bit later. But suffice it to say, I think it's fair to say this one is potentially a more negative one. It's a potential trap, potential pitfall that could hurt you. But it really all depends on how much you choose to remember your failures, right? Because in most games, the air observer didn't actually cause problems for me. Of course, in most games, he was taken out by a sniper pretty early, so he didn't get off two shots anyway. But suffice it to say, like, a lot of people have really bad memories tied to their own fighter plane taking out their own stuff. And so, hey, if you have a negative opinion on this special rule from second edition, fair enough. I have no complaints. But the final one is one that's often overlooked, and it was quite nice, which is with modern communications. And the fact that they had radios on everything. And like so many squads had radios. You could avoid the -1 penalty to arrive from reserves, which is really nice because it means bringing things on as a counter deploy was very easy to do. And when you have stuff like bazookas and flamethrower teams and big squads that can jump out of, good sized vehicles, there was a lot of advantages to holding something in reserve and then bringing it on partially into turn two and taking people out because they weren't ready for you. They hadn't planned around it. They'd forgotten that you left something in reserve. Quite nice, quite useful. So all in all, very, very good stuff. The special rules on the whole, pretty great. But there are two additional secret special rules that they also get, which are also really nice. And the first is you can get access to multiple BARs. Now, the Browning automatic rifle is something that some other nations do get access to. Poland gets access to them. Belgium gets access to them. The British get access to them with their Home Guard infantry section. But in general, most nations didn't get access to the BAR. The Americans not only got access to the BAR, which on its own is fantastic because it's, at least in my opinion, it's arguably one of the best small arms weapons in second edition. But in addition, they could take up to 2 to 3 of them on most of their squad sections. And basically every section could take at least one, which is awesome. So toward that end, really good fire support that avoids what I quickly discovered was kind of a trap with buying light machine guns in second edition. They got access not to LMGs for the overwhelming majority of their forces. They got access to the BAR. And that was excellent. But the second special rule they have is what I like to call machine guns everywhere. During the war, a lot of armies made use of machine guns on vehicles, right? They'd put them, as double turrets in the case of the Vickers E6 and the T26, and the Polish variant of the Vickers E6, the 7TP and stuff like that. You see those there, but in general, most armies started moving toward, we're going to have our anti-infantry, anti-vehicle tanks with, a coaxial machine gun and maybe a forward-facing machine gun. Sometimes you'll see a pintle-mounted machine gun, but in general, that's kind of what they latched onto. And then they'd have their anti-aircraft vehicles, and the anti-aircraft vehicles would be, armed with, autocannons or heavy machine guns or something like that in order to take on enemy aircraft. American war doctrine said, yeah, we're going to have some anti-aircraft vehicles, and we'll see that, a little later on there. They are pretty good, actually. But you're also going to find that the Americans just started throwing pintle-mounted machine guns on everything, like literally everything. The thinking being, well, if you hear aircraft and you see aircraft, pop the hatch and just start letting some rounds go. And even if you don't down the aircraft, you'll probably drive it off, which is good enough, right? It'll keep them away from us, which is going to keep the boys safe. And that's what we need in order to take the ground. So the result is Americans can take pintle-mounted machine guns and sometimes even heavy machine guns on like literally everything. Doesn't mean you necessarily should, but if you want to have the option for extra firepower, you have the option for extra firepower, which is pretty cool. In terms of your headquarters, your officers are fine. It's what everybody else gets, an experienced through veteran of all of the different ranks, which is great. Your forward observers are average to poor in that you get access to all of the observers at all veterancy levels. You get a benefit to your air observer, but I think it's fair to say the air observer was not as great as the artillery observer because it was a lot harder for the artillery observer to hurt you. And the air observer had a chance to hurt you twice. So again, I think it's more closer to the average than it is to poor, but fair enough. I know some people really had bad experiences with it in second, so I'll rate it down slightly below the others just because. Your medics were great, mostly because you could take the regular option, which is good. And for your special officers, you got access to things like the chaplain. And chaplains, I know that they have a mixed thought process on whether or not you should take them in second or third edition for that matter. We're going to be doing a dedicated video on the chaplain, so we won't talk about that much now. But suffice it to say, because it's not in the original army book, it came out with later books, campaign books, and then got applied back to the army list in general through those books. But the chaplain at the start of its activation, after it declared its order, had the ability to be able to remove a pin on a unit. You'd perform a roll, and on like a 4+ or got better or worse depending on whether or not you were inexperienced or veteran. So there's a reason to take a veteran chaplain. You could remove a pin from a unit that was within 6 inches of you. Which on the one hand, you tell yourself, okay, removing one pin isn't that great. It'd be nice if it was like D3, right? Or something like that. And you're right, that would be really nice. However, remember that in second edition, pins were a lot harder to do because a lot of units were hitting on 5s or 6s. So you didn't have nearly as many pins being thrown out. And second, the fact that each pin was a -1 to your shooting ability meant being pinned even by 2 or 3 pins was pretty much a sign you were going to be rallying. So if a chaplain could remove a pin from you before you got started, and then if you pass your order test, you remove a second pin, you could go from having a good number of pins in second edition to having no pins or only maybe 1 pin screwing up your shots, which was really nice. So the chaplain was kind of a means of insurance, and it was a pure support unit, right? You couldn't assault with them. I don't think they were even allowed to contest objectives. So, they were purely there for support, but a pretty useful support piece. And I think on the whole, chaplains get a thumbs up in my book. Admittedly, I tend to be the kind of person who likes support. I tend to play support characters when I play role-play games. I tend to like having support options in my armies if I have the chance. And the chaplain definitely meets that requirement. When you look at the infantry sections, you got a lot of stuff going on here, but honestly, they're all more or less the same. There's not actually that much variety when it comes to infantry. Your inexperienced troops are, sorry about that. Your inexperienced troops are fine. You get access to the BAR, so it's not as much of a trap as the LMG. The BAR was also only 5 points, so it was less than an infantryman, contributing the same number of shots as your infantryman, while getting extra range over an infantryman. And you didn't have to worry about a loader who was losing his shot because of that. So in that sense, BAR, fantastic. And it means that your inexperienced troops are going to be fine. If you really feel like taking inexperienced troops. A lot of people didn't, though, because for only a few more points, you could take regulars that were going to be much more reliable at shooting. They weren't going to be removed as much. You could take just as many BARs. The BAR was better than the light machine gun because you could pay half as many points to get the same number of shots coming out from the same number of bodies. At a slightly lower range, but also no threat of a -1 to hit because somebody takes out your loader, right? Or something like that. You could also take 2 to 3 per squad, so you could get more shots than a unit that was limited to 1 light machine gun. And you had very easy access to stubborn because you had access to both U.S. Marines as well as paratroopers, which is fantastic. You have your veterans, which are also great. It's basically the exact same thing as the regulars, except that they did have the access to pay +1 point per man to take tough fighters. So, if you wanted to have a close combat assault unit, because that was one of the weaker points about Americans, they did have some difficulty getting into assault. You could do that, and there were a couple of different ways to do it, which was nice, whether it's pistols on U.S. Marines or whether it's just taking the upgrade for free on, it's an additional upgrade on traditional veteran infantry. So, you had a couple of different ways all around, good choices, right? You're not going bad. And then in terms of specialists, you had Rangers who were paying an extra point for a free move action that was ambush free before the beginning of turn 1, which is awesome. You have paratroopers who can get access to 3 submachine guns, which is not a lot of submachine guns, but it's more than you get anywhere else in the American list. So there's that. You have access to engineers, so you can take the flamethrower, plus you could take a couple of SMGs with that. And you had access to things like the U.S. Marine Corps Raiders, which had a bunch of very useful special rules for, very, stubborn, solid, reliable, close combat infantry, while also having access to war dogs for just an additional slot of infantry if you really wanted it, in a small team that was relatively inexpensive, which is awesome. And if people were hidden, they found them a lot more easily. So on the whole, infantry section, pretty good. But as you can tell, very seriously slanted toward skirmish. Not as great at close combat removal. So there is a slight gap in the inventory here for the Americans. For team weapons, machine gun teams were not that great because you were kind of tempted to take heavy machine guns, and heavy machine gun teams are not that good in second edition. Much improved in third edition, more on that in a future video. But at least in second edition, it's going to drag your rating down in the machine gun area. Your mortar teams were fantastic. You got access to all of them, so you could do whatever you like. Your anti-tank teams, you only got one, but it was a top three anti-tank team for the game, and that was the bazooka team. At 24 inches with a +5 penetration, no penalty to that penetration for shooting at long range. I mean, you could drop this thing into a Jeep for less than 80 points as long as you're taking the infantry regular. And you can zip it around with, again, no penalty to come in from reserve. So you can wait until turn 2 to see where the enemy armor is, let them move up maybe even a little bit closer, and then you can advance up the Jeep, possibly even on a road, then advance out the bazooka team. And you might find that you're not even at long range anymore shooting at stuff. It could be pretty effective. Pretty effective. And then you've got the sniper teams, which were average to good. It's the same, sniper teams that everybody else gets, but the big problem for most people, sniper teams, of course, is if they advance, so if they move and then try to shoot, unless you're the Finns, you're going to be performing it without any of the benefits of your sniper benefit, right? You're not ignoring all hit modifiers other than pins and losing your buddy. You're not going to be ignoring cover and stuff like that. You're not going to get to pick your targets. American snipers have the benefit that if you do have to advance, because maybe you have to get away from a mortar or something like that that's ranging in on you, even if you don't get the sniper benefits, at least you're also not getting the -1 to hit because it's still a rifle, right? So per the Army Special Rule, it's still benefiting from the rifle. Tack onto this the fact that you could give both dudes submachine guns if you really wanted to, meant that you could make your sniper team kind of a flex unit, right? Where on the one hand, it could be providing solid firepower, but if you really needed to, it could move out and start shooting at people at close range and potentially even assault if they really needed to, which is pretty awesome. Yeah, flamethrower teams. Flamethrower teams for the Americans are excellent, both because you get the standard ones that everybody gets, but you also got access to an assault squad. And the assault squad allowed you to take basically another infantry section with flamethrowers in it. Now, you didn't get a lot of options in terms of what you gave to everybody, but you could also take a BAR on this. So, you could give them pretty good shots from a distance and then make it even better getting with that flamethrower when you're up close and personal. So lots of options there that allowed for a much more survivable flamethrower team, which is excellent. It also meant because you were taking a full squad, losing the flamethrower didn't automatically remove the team if you lost it to exceptional damage, like was done from a sniper. So suddenly, your flamethrower, it's not per se safer from sniper fire, but it's safer from everything else. And it kept the unit on the table, so the order dice was safer from snipers, which is really nice. No special team weapons, if you can believe it. The Americans coming up with all kinds of stuff. They don't have anything truly unique other than obviously their one bazooka team that they get in the anti-tank team sections. And so we'll move on to artillery. In the artillery section, their howitzers were great, not only because you had options for gun shields, they weren't hard baked in, so you had a choice on whether you wanted that extra cost or not. In second edition, I think the gun shield was worth it 9 times out of 10 because increasing the difficulty to wound a regular artillery crew to the same difficulty as wounding a veteran crew was really nice, especially against most things that were going to be shooting at you, right? Sure, if somebody came at you with a flamethrower, a gun shield doesn't help against a flamethrower. But most things firing at you is going to do a good job, which is nice. You also get access to recoilless artillery where you're paying dramatically less. You're saving like 10 points or more sometimes on taking a unit. And the reason why is because it only does a D3 of hits against a building instead of D6, but it doesn't actually change the profile of the weapon against anything that isn't a building. So considering that buildings were death traps in a lot of cases for people in second edition, it was really good if you were fighting cavalry. It was nice to hang out in buildings, especially if you could keep away enemy high explosive damage. But on literally anything else, there was a good chance 9 times out of 10, the difference between a recoilless gun and a traditional, say, light howitzer or something like that, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference. They were exactly the same. So on the whole, it was nice that they had that option. It could save you some points if you were looking at going the light armor, artillery support route. Maybe you're running, I don't know, paratroopers or something like that, and you wanted to run things a little more historical. At least you could save some points. And then with the anti-tank guns, they weren't great, both because they don't benefit from any of your special rules. They don't have anything unique or special that makes them interesting. And you do have some really, really big guns there that are going to eat up a lot of points, and they're going to attract a lot of mortars. So because of that, not the greatest option in my mind, especially since you have access to really good anti-aircraft guns. You have a twin anti-aircraft light autocannon gun, which is awesome. You get access to a heavy anti-aircraft gun, which is awesome because heavy autocannons are great. And you get access to the M51 gun carriage, which is 12 shots from 4 heavy machine guns with a +1 to wound, which is awesome. um, and then you also had access to rocket launchers. If you wanted to pay up to 65 points regular for a 4-man multiple rocket launcher system, or 60 points for a 3-man multiple rocket launcher system, you had 2 options. So if you're more of a multiple rockets person, you have access to multiple launchers, which is great. So on the whole, good artillery. Then we get to armor. And armor is where the Americans shine, right here. Okay, your tanks are exceptional. You get access to the M3 Stuart, which was the dominant tank of its time. There were some other tanks that were really good. Don't get me wrong. The Daka Panzer III is fantastic. The M1542 is fantastic. But I think it's fair to say when you're looking at mostly armies high up in competition, especially near the twilight of second edition, the M3 Stuart is going to be commonplace. You would also commonly see the M3 Lee from people who wanted a tank that wasn't as good against infantry because Americans get access to BARs, right? And so because of that, you already have pretty good anti-personnel removal in a lot of other tools. And so if you didn't want to take another anti-infantry removal tool like the M3 Stuart, or if you just wanted to stick around longer and live longer, you could take an M3 Lee, and that one's rocking 2, not 1, but 2 AT guns. So if you want to trigger a lot of people's recce moves so that way you can start pinning them and knocking them out with other tools. M3 Lee does a great job at that. It's a brawler, it's a bruiser. It'll take a beating for you at damage value 9 with no downsides if you pay the right way. And only for around 250 points. So, it's still relatively affordable at 1,000 points to be able to fit this thing in. If you're playing with the Juggernaut rules in second edition, it was really affordable and you could take a second one for free, which was awesome. So the M3 Lee did have its place in the sun, and it was a really good and interesting option because there weren't really any other options that got access to 2 AT guns for good solid armor removal. You have an M24 Chaffee, which is if you want a really big gun on a much lighter chassis and you want to save yourself some points on that gun, the Chaffee's where it's at. You can take recce on this thing, so it's quite survivable for being a relatively light tank. Relatively durable, all things considered, for a late war, light armor vehicle. Very, very solid. You had access to flamethrower tanks of all kinds, super light to super heavy. You have amphibious machine gun carriers and sometimes even armed with flamethrowers themselves with the LVT series of stuff. Just all kinds of options for a lot of different play styles and overcoming a lot of different types of obstacles, presenting you with new opportunities, all of which is great. Your tank destroyers are fantastic, mostly because a lot of them are super cheap. You can take them on super light carriers if you want to, with really big guns, commonly getting access to heavy and super heavy AT guns for very inexpensive. I would also personally put the M3 Lee from a role perspective more as a tank destroyer rather than a tank proper. And so you also see that one, and whether you're running a Wolverine, Hellcat, you can go bigger with the Jackson if you really want to, but I think you're kind of wasting points at that point. I would go something a little bit lighter and then just keep it safe. But all of those, fantastic. Near the end of second edition, a lot of people were playing around with Hellcat and seeing how much they could do to those really light, quick M3 Stuarts. That maybe you trap down by shooting at them with something like a bazooka, they wreck you, and then you M18 Hellcat into them, and you take them out. And so, we saw quite a bit of success coming from American tank destroyers. Self-propelled guns were really great. The Priest is good. The Scott is good. If you like mortar carriers are a very inefficient, in my opinion, way to get firepower. But they're a very mobile way to do mortars, which is great. So if you like mortars, there you go. You have the M4 Sherman 105 millimeter, which technically maybe it's a self-propelled gun, maybe it's not. I'm going to count it here because having access to a damage value 9 fully buttoned up medium howitzer that can move and shoot in the same turn is extremely rare. You're talking like, the Americans, a couple of German stuff, and then of course, you get access to a number of these things with, through like Lend-Lease and stuff like that. So like there are a couple of armies that get access to it, but most armies would love to have that kind of firepower. And the 105 millimeter Sherman did perform really well. And then the AA platform stuff, honestly, this is exceptional. One of the best sets you're going to get. You have access to things like the M16 MGMC or the Meat Chopper, which is, again, it's that quad heavy, heavy machine gun stuck in a fully rotating turret, admittedly damage value 7, open-topped half-track. But the result is, it was pretty nimble. It could really tear apart infantry if you didn't need another anti-tank option because, maybe you're running, a bazooka and, maybe you're running an M8 Greyhound or something else like that, and you felt like you wanted something just that could chop infantry. Machine gun motor carriages, which is what MGMC stands for, were really good. You had an M15 variant, which allowed you to swap out basically two of those heavy machine guns for a heavy autocannon. So it became kind of multi-purpose where it could chop infantry, but it could also do, I mean, it could do a solid number on light armor and transports, which is also good. And you had the Quad 50 gun truck, which is, again, it's just you put a whole bunch of machine guns on the back of a truck. So if you really, really want super light, super cheap, super easy stuff, you can do that with the Americans as well. And then for the special vehicles, we have the Sherman Calliope because we do have to mention this thing. Is it the best idea to take a full M4 Sherman and then put a multiple rocket launcher on it, which adds like 40 points to the cost or something crazy like that? It was a lot to add on to it. Is that the best idea? Especially when you can only fire either the main gun or the multiple rocket launcher on a given turn? Probably not. That being said, a damage value 9, fully buttoned up, multiple rocket launcher avoids so many of the problems that other vehicle mounted and infantry mounted, for that matter, multiple rocket launchers faced. Because the Sherman Calliope could rush through rough terrain to get to you if it needed to adjust where it was positioned and then shoot at stuff and then end in cover. That's something that almost nobody else could do. Like, Panzerwerfer 42, the Renault UE and stuff like that for the Germans can do it. But in both of those cases, you're looking at a really light option, low damage value, very easy to remove. Damage value 9 Sherman, now that requires work. So, and, whereas you could run up to an open-topped, or in the case of the Katyushka for the Soviet Union, a truck-mounted one, you could rush up, assault, and destroy it relatively easily. Damage value 9 fully buttoned up Sherman, now that is not so easy to do, right? Even with anti-tank grenades, that's not particularly easy to do. So, toward that end, Calliope, is it a meta option in second edition? We did not see it grace the top tables at major tournaments, but it is interesting. And it does have its uses. I probably wouldn't personally do it, but it does mean the Americans can also do, in a single platoon, they can do double multiple rocket launchers, which a lot of armies couldn't do. For your armored car selection, you don't have any tankettes. The Americans didn't really believe in making tankettes. Instead, they put it into armored cars, and their armored cars, honestly, are not that great. You get access to the M8 Greyhound. I like the look of the Greyhound. It does play decently well. It is very expensive for an open-topped damage value 7 recce tank dueler, effectively, right? The twin bazooka Jeep is cool. It is expensive for being on a very, very light chassis, but I mean, it's damage value 7 from the front, which is not horrible. And the double bazookas can fire potentially every single turn, and they're on a 360-degree platform. So, you can shoot wherever you need them, which is really awesome. And even just the lowly Jeep, if you just give it a machine gun, like, it was fine for locking things down. It wasn't great for locking things down. But like, it would be a decent number of shots. It could do pins on a given turn. Not the greatest, but it was fine. And then as we look at tows and transports, everything here is great. Your soft transports were fantastic. You got access to an 8-man capacity truck, which is a really sweet spot number in terms of saving points while also making back value. Your armored cars were good in as much as armored carriers were good. In second edition, you get the M3 White Scout car if you want something zippy on wheels with good capacity. Variety of half tracks if you want something that's, maybe not quite as zippy, but, might be able to have higher capacity transportation, can tow more stuff. You get access to those. Your gun transports are fantastic because you get guns on literally everything because, again, American Secret Special Rule. Your tows are great because you get access to horse-drawn limbers, and your gun tows are fantastic because you can take a 15-point regular artillery tractor with a heavy machine gun on it for an extra 25 points. And while 40 points sounds like a lot to pay for a tractor, and you're right, it is, being able to take a heavy machine gun for half the cost of a heavy machine gun team and less than the cost of a medium machine gun team is phenomenal value and really maneuverable. So on the whole, I think it's pretty good. So what are your best choices? What are you looking at primarily? Well, you got regular infantry with BARs as your good supporting fire unit. You get access to engineers, which are fantastic. You get access to veterans for pushing up if you really want to do close combat assault style stuff. You get access to mortars, bazookas, flamethrowers, all of which are worth taking. You have howitzers, anti-aircraft guns, multiple rocket launchers in your artillery section, all of which are good. You get access to the M3 Stuart, the M3 Lee, the M24 Chaffee. There are technically other options, but if I was starting out going in second edition, that's where I would have started, and that is where I started. And so that's what I would do. And then you had LVT transports if you want, nice big transports. Some of those had a lot of guns on them too, which is awesome. And then you also get access to the M4 artillery tractor with a heavy machine gun if you feel like playing a bit of fun. And so your list might look something like this. At 15 order dice at 1,000 points, this is a good, solid number. Okay. And you got a lieutenant with an extra dude, taking inexperienced. You've got 2 squads of 5-man ranger teams with a BAR each, taking a veteran. We're going to use these guys for some early, middle of the board push style stuff, but they're not primarily going to try to get too close to the enemy. That's not their purpose. We're going to then back those guys up with 2 7-man U.S. infantry sections with 2 BARs each. That's 9 shots coming out from those 7 guys as early as turn 1. And even if we start losing a bunch of guys, we don't lose very many shots for a good long while, which is also good. And these guys are going to provide some of that long range fire support. They'll move up as they can as they get opportunities toward the center of the board. But in general, we can sit back. We can just provide pins down range so that we're softening everybody up for our 5-man engineering section. We'll give the NCO a submachine gun and we'll add a flamethrower on there. We'll take those guys at regular. And for our flamethrower team, we're going to take a U.S. Army Infantry Assault Squad, which will have the exact same loadout, but also with AT grenades, 5 men, NCO submachine gun, flamethrower, AT grenades. So 2 5-man sections for pushing up, 2 5-man sections for holding the middle, 2 7-man sections for backline fire support. We're then going to do a medium mortar team inexperienced. We'll take a bazooka team at regular. And then we'll take an M18 recoilless artillery because, hey, if we're going to take a light howitzer, we might as well take it a little bit cheaper and take it recoilless. That'll be fine. We'll take an M4 artillery tractor with a pintle-mounted heavy machine gun, not because we actually intend to haul the recoilless artillery gun, but rather just because, hey, it's a super cheap pintle-mounted HMG, and I felt like the pintle-mounted HMG might be better than adding a couple more bodies to other dudes and losing another dice. So we'll keep that in. We got the M3 Stuart with the twin forward light machine guns. I did not buy recce on this because I didn't have the points. Also because on your Daka tank, there's a legitimate question on do you want to spend a turn recceing away from things? You have to be a little more careful with how you place it and when you shoot at stuff, how exposed you are. But I think we'll be able to cover it because we're going to take that armored jeep with the twin bazookas and we're going to give everything else something much more interesting, much easier, and frankly, much more dangerous to shoot at. And then we're going to take 2 Dodge 3/4-ton trucks with machine guns on them. We'll take these regular, so that way if we want to bring them in from reserve, they're very reliable. They've got the machine gun that's not suffering a -1 to hit, so these will also be providing long-range fire support for us. And we're going to put the engineers with a lieutenant in one. We're going to put the flamethrower squad with a bazooka in the other, and that gives you a very aggressive, forward-playing army that still has dramatic amounts of fire support coming from behind. Multiple threats, creating multiple dilemmas for the enemy means it should perform decently well. So where are we in 3rd edition so far? Well, unlike every other army we've talked about so far in this series, we actually have the army book for this one. So we have a pretty good idea on where we roughly stand, okay? And so to start off with, your army special rules are on average increasing the number of shots you get per squad, which is very useful. You are not ignoring the -1 to hit penalty on advance anymore. So on the one hand, getting an extra shot for every 3 rifles that you have in the squad is problematic because it doesn't include BARs, but more on that again later on this week. We'll be talking about that on Thursday. The second thing is that if you had a squad that was just staying put and shooting, because maybe they were in cover, they were on an objective, and they didn't have to move, in 2nd edition, you weren't getting any benefits. You were just a normal infantry section like every other army had, except you had access to multiple BARs. In 3rd edition, if you do that, you are getting extra shots off of your rifles. So you're actually better off than you were before, which might play more toward a mechanized style of play because if you can move people up quickly and then drop them somewhere and then they don't have to move, that might actually be better, right? So toward that end, I'm not going to say you're worse off because I don't think you are. I think it's roughly about the same in terms of how it works out. Ignoring -1 to hit has its benefits. Ignoring, being able to take full advantage when you're just taking a fire action also has its advantages. It really all depends on how you choose to play it. Air observers are better objectively because the chance that you nuke your own guys is extremely small and very much dependent on where you choose to place the token and where you choose to move your men, which is fantastic. If they're not within 12 inches of the potential strike, you can't nominate them as the new target, which means you're likely not going to be hitting your own stuff nearly as often, which is good. On the other hand, Anti-aircraft guns also got a whole lot cheaper. So are they actually going to show up? Right? I mean, like I was on Facebook the other day and was talking with some people, and there was a person legitimately asking the question, "Is it worth it for me to buy an air observer?" And I think I think that's a fair question in third edition, because on the one hand, they can be really good. They can be quite effective if your opponent has no flak. If they have flak, especially if they've invested in some flak, maybe because they liked another unit, they took like an M16 MGMC, right? Where you've got 12 shots with machine guns, you're going to get 3 hits against the plane. There's no doubt, right? And so if you're going to get 3 hits against the plane, you're going to drive off that plane every single time, which means you're either waiting to call in your strikes until you can take that piece out, which is not so easy to do, or you're not really doing anything, right? You spend a lot of points for a whole lot of nothing, because it's not even like the anti-aircraft vehicle or anti-aircraft gun needs to activate in order to perform its shots. It gets to do that for free between turns. So, like, they are better. I'm grateful. I think the design is definitely a lot better. I think it could still be a little bit better than it currently is. But on the whole, I don't know, man. I don't think I would personally be taking Air Observers in third edition. It's a skew build that can work really well, but I think you are rolling the dice on it in terms of what your opponent brings and what their army is going to look like. Tanks are still really good, right? Even with machine gun shots being halved and stuff like that, your tanks are still fantastic. The really expensive ones got brought down in cost so they're a little more manageable, which is great. So you can actually run Pershing, a double Pershing if you really want to. Some people have, and it's actually not been horrible for them. Not great, but not horrible. And so because of that, a country that was really good with tanks already is so really good with tanks. That's always fantastic. You get access to more bazookas, which is always better, because the bazooka is great value for the kind of firepower that you get. And if you have more than one of them, they can't just lock down the threat by putting some pins down range on it, possibly removing the team, stick your sniper on it for one turn and you're done, right? You can't do that, which is fantastic. The M51 machine gun motor carriage, the artillery choice that had not been eroded yet and had 24 shots with +1 to wound at 48 inches. Not gonna lie, for a while there, chef's kiss. I went out and bought one, just because, hey, you know what? I'll give Warlord some money. Why not? And hey, it's cool to have those in your collection, so I don't mind. I think the nerf was fine. Bringing them back down to 12 shots with +1 to wound, having used it in practice, still removes people almost every single time you shoot with it, if not every single time you shoot with it. So it's fine. It's totally fine. So still very, very good. And your transports went down in cost. So your transports, which were already great, are even better now. So on the whole, how is America looking? America's looking really good going into the new edition. That being said, I do think there's some room for change. So what would I do? First things first, and I mentioned this back in the anti-tank rifle video several weeks ago. I would add the AT rifle as an anti-tank option, maybe only for the U.S. Marine Corps. Maybe you get access to it if you take, the Marine side of by air, land, and sea. Maybe if your officer, if your platoon commander takes it, right, or something like that, if he takes the upgrade, then maybe you get access to the AT rifle, right? But honestly, you could open it up to everybody. I don't have a problem with opening it up to everybody. The Americans did have a number of these, the boys AT rifle in stock before the bazooka got released, because the bazooka doesn't really make an appearance until like late 1942, early 1943. So because of that, like, and yeah, people, the poor guys in Guadalcanal, and in the Pacific Theater, they didn't get bazookas until really late. So toward that end, I think adding the AT rifle doesn't like, if you don't have it, you're not in a bad place with Americans. But I do like the idea of giving them options, right? Do you want to go for a smaller caliber round that's doing less damage, less penetration, but it's also cheaper? So maybe it saves you some points so you can do other stuff with your list that you want. I think that would be fine. No problems here. I think the American special rules on the whole are fine. I think they all work great. If you wanted to change back the rule to, the old fire and maneuver rule to the second edition rule, I don't think it'd be horrible. Math has been done by other people on whether or not it would overpower the game. I've seen the math. I mostly agree with the math. I applaud when game developers, as a general rule, and rule writers do not commonly throw out core rules of the game. So toward that end, I don't have a problem with them making it so that nobody in the game gets to ignore the move and shoot penalty. Don't have a problem with that. It also means, again, you are getting benefits for standing still, which Americans didn't get in the last edition. So I'm okay with that. I do think we need to give a look at the 3 subtypes. By Airland and Sea is a fantastic way of categorizing it. And, it's thematic, it's cool, it sounds good. Um, Paratroopers, I think, are fine. Paying plus 1 point per man for stubborn is great because it means you can have stubborn officers, which is really good. Your Rangers are veteran only, so it's already more expensive to take that extra Rangers lead the way thing. So what I would do is I would give you a benefit where if your platoon commander also takes this rule, then if your rifle platoon commander takes this rule, then your rifle platoon gains access to 0 to 2 sniper teams instead of 0 to 1. And this is based on two things. One, the fact that, as we mentioned in the sniper video, snipers kind of need some help. And partially it's because it's really difficult to maximize the benefit of a sniper because you can't take very many of them, right? You have to take a whole new rifle platoon for every single one you want to add, and you can't take them in any other platoon. So if you want to take more snipers, you have to take rifle platoons specifically, which is a very expensive way to do a one drop of an additional team weapon. But in addition, the Ranger order of battle, at least as far back as Normandy, possibly earlier than that, relied on 2 sniper teams for every platoon. And the reason for that is because they knew they were going to be the first ones in and they weren't going to have a lot of cover fire. So they relied on sniper teams to provide them with cover. And there's quite a few stories of incredible marksmanship coming from guys in the boats as they are approaching the shore. So that way the Rangers could scale the cliffs. And you have the sniper teams doing an incredible job of shutting down machine gun nests up there on the top of those cliffs. So that way their brothers could get up and onto pretty sheer cliff sides. If you've ever been to Normandy, pretty sheer cliff sides. So I would allow them to take it. Again, it has to be taken on a veteran unit, right? So a veteran officer has to take this already. If he's already paying the extra plus 1 point per man on this, you've paid such a premium on this thing already. Why not give you access to another potential option? This isn't a free sniper team. It's just an extra slot. I think that would be fine. And then with your U.S. Marine Corps, you could pay an extra plus 1 point per man for maybe tough fighters instead of stubborn. Another thing you could do, because you can still, I think, take tough fighters on your standard everyday veteran infantry section, is you could make this plus 1 point for fieldcraft. Fieldcraft would be quite good for Marines because it means they'd have an easier time getting through things like, say, water, right? Crossover rivers better and stuff like that, which is good. Very thematic for Marines. The second thing is that Americans, on the whole, we don't get a lot of access to fieldcraft. Literally anywhere in our list, it's very rare that you see fieldcraft. And so I wouldn't mind if people gave you the option to be like, hey, here, have some extra fieldcraft in there. I think that'd be okay. But choose one of those. Whichever one, doesn't really matter to me. But choose one of those. So that way, again, they're all doing something different. And one's more resilience, stubborn. One is more mobility, Rangers lead the way. So I feel like it should be tough fighters because offense should be the other thing that you're getting instead of another mobility channel. But on the whole, yeah, I think that would be okay. Special rules considerations. If you are going to make a change, I'm just going to walk you through a couple of small arms that are worth considering, okay, as we're looking at the new army. So first of all, the BARs, should they be added to the rifles give extra shots rules? Maybe. Could be useful. I wouldn't mind it. I think BARs go back to auto-include like they were in 2nd edition. I don't think it's strictly necessary, but I think there would definitely be a lot of benefit to that if one were to do that. I probably wouldn't. And I'll explain why on Thursday in a much longer video looking at a whole lot of math, so you can see why, in my opinion, BARs don't have to be included in there. They're still worth taking. They're still very good for taking. And they actually aren't costing you all that much in shots or points in order to take them. But if you wanted to give them the benefit as somebody who has built an awful lot of BARs, I wouldn't mind. Okay, but I don't think it's strictly necessary. Submachine guns, with the way the special rules are currently written, are still really hard to justify in the list because they're not giving you extra shots like rifles are. They do get to ignore move and shoot penalties, so it's at least slightly better than 2nd edition. In 2nd edition, you were paying full freight for your submachine guns, but every single man who was taking a rifle or a BAR, which was 90% of the guys you had, other than maybe some guys as part of a paratrooper or I think U.S. Rangers could also take light machine guns. Unless they were part of those and were taking an LMG, everybody else was already getting ignore -1 to move and shoot. So really, the only benefit of taking the submachine gun was you were overpaying for those lots of shots really close and assault, which is tricky. And in addition, we mentioned this earlier when we talked about the airborne, Americans didn't have a lot of ways to really take advantage of submachine guns, right? They didn't get a lot of SMGs on hardly any squad. So submachine guns even now are even harder to justify because assaulting things gets harder. So why am I paying for assault? Um, Getting closer is arguably harder to do now that you got more units shooting more stuff, more impact, and cover doesn't help you nearly as much to avoid getting hit. Um, if you're losing guys, you're gonna be losing a whole lot more points by taking submachine guns on them now because submachine guns went up to 4 points per man instead of 3 points per man. It's just a lot harder to justify taking submachine guns, which is sad. I feel like there should be a way to justify taking SMGs. I don't know what it is, but it should be there. Maybe that'll be my next big project that I'll work on and we'll make a whole video on it. I don't know. We'll see. Shotguns are still not great. They were not particularly great in second edition. I played around with them. I really did give them an honest try. I didn't like them. I didn't like them one bit. So I'm sorry. And looking at them in third edition, I still don't like shotguns. I don't think that they're worth taking. Pistols, because they're not a +1 point add-on to add tough fighters to people anymore. Pistols are also not great, and they're actually really hard to find now in American lists because you can't just take pistols on Marines anymore. So like, I don't know, man. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan. I think you just pass on the pistols, honestly, which is sad. So because a lot of people they modeled them up with pistols and stuff like, and that's awesome, and they look really cool, and yeah, it's worth it to take pistols on some officers. Maybe you got an artillery platoon or heavy weapons platoon, you plan on keeping that platoon commander back, take a pistol on them. That makes sense. But in general, like, it just hurts a little bit because you want to be able to do something with them, especially with the models that you've made. And I just don't see the value here, guys. I'm sorry. So on the whole, what is the result? Honestly, when you're looking at armies that you're building in third edition, I think you're looking at rifles, more rifles, BARs and LMGs sometimes, right? And now that we've got a bunch of these mechanized units that allow you to take more stuff, Americans can get away with a whole lot more just in a rifle platoon than they can outside of a rifle platoon, right? You don't have to necessarily add a heavy weapons platoon, which is really nice because you can take like, a mechanized infantry squad that allows you to take an extra bazooka team. You can take one that allow you to take extra machine guns. You can actually take extra mortars, right? So as long as you're loading up those mechanized infantry, which don't have to have a transport, strictly speaking, as long as you're taking those guys, you can save yourself quite a few points on heavy weapons platoons while still getting the benefits of heavy weapons platoons, because you can take a bunch of the gated heavy weapons that you want to be able to supply, which is really good. So how do Americans perform? I don't think they're top 3 in third edition, but I think they're pretty good. So I think there's a lot there. Could use some extra love and attention. Could use a little bit of an extra punch somewhere here or there. Who knows? I might try as part of the Zern mission pack doing a quick write-up on, a couple of small changes that might make it so that way they fill a better niche. They're more thematic because they have very much moved away from the, the top skirmish, lead skirmish army that's constantly maneuvering around you and staying on the move while shooting at people sort of build. And they very much led to mechanized, move your men up as quickly as possible, sit and camp and fire every single turn if you can, which isn't horrible, but a lot of armies do that. So I'd like to see them be a little bit different. They kind of move from their own unique niche into the mainstream of where everybody else is, and I would love to see that changed. But have I been unfair? Do I love the BAR too much? Fair enough. It's one of my favorite rifles of all time. So, hey, fair enough. Is this like, are the Americans actually fine? They really don't need a boost. Is any of the tuning up that I've done, is that tuning it up too far? Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.